Everybody is still awake. So I finished with the Lattice reduction before the break. And I wanted to say a few stuff about the ring case. So these are very nice complexity statements, but in terms of efficiency, it's not that great. So starting from the late 90s, people started to wonder, can we make a trade-off between efficiency and security? So that goes back to the anterior crypto system, which used special lattices to get better efficiency at the cost of a stronger harness assumption. But at that time, this was very useful. This was just a practical trade-off. And it was not clear whether you could make any complexity statement out of it. But Vincenzo was the first in 2002 to show that you can get also some trade-off in the worst case heuristic reduction itself. So you obtain what I would call a restricted worst case heuristic reduction, where the worst case is not any lattice, it's a special lattice. So you would live within a special class of lattices, such as ideal lattices, but not necessarily just ideal lattices. So to see this, we can play this game. Instead of taking a Z module, like we did before, we took a group. Let's take a finite R module for some ring R, not Z. So in SIS, we did take R equal to Z, but we don't have to. We could take another ring. But again, because we take a finite model, we could pick the uniform distribution. We can choose our model elements uniformly at random. And now the generalized problem would be, instead of finding integers, short integers, we're going to find short ring elements, such that the sum of the xi is equal to 0 in the module. So xi is a ring element, gi is a module element, but because it's an R module, this guy is actually a module element. So we're asking this module element to be 0. Now if we choose our ring R in such a way that R to the n is a lattice, then again, this module problem can be viewed as finding a short vector in some random module sublattice of R to the n. So that's what NTRU used for the special case n equal to 2, so only 2 ring elements. And the ring was a polynomial ring, integer polynomials divided by x to the n minus 1. So m was this. M was the integer polynomial divided by q and x to the n minus 1. And instead of taking the uniform distribution, g1 was the public key and g2 was minus 1. Okay, so that's a way to view NTRU as this ring case. So this worst case heuristic reduction can be generalized in that case, except that the worst case is not the same. So instead of being able to find short vectors in every lattice, you only find it in every special lattice. Okay. So as I said, the first reduction of this kind was in 2002 by Vincenzo. Okay. And as Chris mentioned, you can do the same thing with LWE, and the so-called ring LWE, or module LWE, and so on. Okay, so because I'm shorthand, that's the only thing I want to say about this. So now I want to give you an overview of lattice algorithms. A very short overview. So as I mentioned in the first hour, we know from mathematics that a classical problem is to show the existence of short lattice vectors. Okay, so that's the same as bounding this Hermite constant. Okay. So what is interesting, if you look at all the lattice algorithms that have been developed over the past 30 years, almost 4 years, it turns out that we've essentially been rediscovering mathematics. So all the algorithms that we found are somehow just an algorithmic analog of some upper bound on Hermite constant. So I'll show you what does it mean. So Hermite inequality gives you the LLL algorithms. So-called Mordell's inequality gives you a blockwise generalization of LLL. And we already saw one adaptation when I tell you this worst case Lattice reduction. It actually corresponded to an old proof of Mordell of Minkowski inequality. So it's a bit disappointing that essentially we've been rediscovering mathematics. Okay? But of course there's a different insight because we're interested in complexity. So essentially there are two types of SVT algorithms. Whenever you want just to approximate the problem, but you want to do it very efficiently, so you're only interested in polynomial time algorithms, and therefore the approximation factor is going to be large. So that's the case of LLL in this block generalization. Or you want the approximation factor to be very small, maybe even 1. In that case, you pay the price, your running time is going to be at least exponential. And then you have two types of algorithms. Either you restrict to a very small space, very small memory, so that's enumeration and beyond, or you're willing to pay exponential memory, and then you have all these seeding algorithms. So as I mentioned earlier, we kind of stuck with lattice reduction. So why is it? So whenever you have a basis, there is a very useful tool that you could do, which is the following. So any basis defines many sublattices. So how do you do that? You truncate your basis. So let's take the first I vectors of your basis and take the linear combination of these vectors. That defines you a sublattice of L. So let's call it Li. Li is a sublattice spanned by the first I vectors. So when you do that, in terms of abstract algebra, you define a flag. The flag is just the sequence of sublattices. So L1, L2, LD. That's a flag. So that's a filtration. You're doing a filtration of the lattice. And what is nice is that you can do it allows you to do induction. So why is it? These sublattices are connected to each other. They allow you to divide. What does it mean? If you take Lj, this sublattice, and if you take I less than j, then you realize that Lj divided by Li is not any group. It's actually a lattice. You can view it as a lattice. So in terms of implementation, you can view it as some projection of a lattice. And it's a very natural lattice. Its rank is j minus I. And the volume of this quotient lattice is just the quotient of the volume. Okay. So whenever you have a basis, you can do a lot of nice operation. So why is it nice? This lattice has a lower rank. Its rank is j minus I, so you can really fine-grain your complexity by defining plenty of low-rank lattices from your initial lattice. Okay? So typically what you want to do is solve your hard lattice problems on these low-rank lattices and somehow lift it to solutions for your initial lattice. Okay. So that's the key idea behind the use of lattice reduction, is this filtration. Okay. So maybe it looks very weird that way, so I'm going to give you a first concrete example with Hermite inequality. Okay. So remember what I mentioned before in the first hour. I said that Hermite in 1850, he showed that his constant was exponential. So the exponential function was 4/3 to the power d minus 1 divided by 2. And this is exactly gamma 2 to the power d minus 1. So when you see this, you realize that intuitively, we should be able to find short vectors within this bound using some kind of two-dimensional reduction. But Heuristic inequality is just an inequality. It's just the existence of short lattice vectors. What if we want to find such vectors? So that's the LLL algorithm. So LLL is an algorithmic version of Heuristic inequality. It finds you, in polynomial time, a basis whose first vector satisfies this bound. Except I'm cheating a little bit. You don't exactly have 4/3, you have 4/3 plus epsilon. And the running time will depend on epsilon. Okay. But this is just a minor technicalities. Okay. So what does it have to do with the filtration I described before? So this is the key idea. I said that once you have a basis, you can always take quotient. So that's the thing. Divide L by L1. L1 is the lattice spanned by B1. Now you get a D minus 1 lattice. And here's the relationship. The norm of B1 is exactly the ratio of the volume. Now imagine that by induction, you find a short vector in that quotient lattice. So you found some vector B2 such that B2 modulo L1 satisfies Hermitian inequality in the quotient. Yeah. So your projection is just a way to implement this quotient. So suppose you're asking me, how do I define explicitly this lattice? You could do it by your projection. What I want to do is avoid projection. I don't want to do branchment of organization. So what I'm saying is before, when I did this situation, this is specific to basis. If you take a lattice and you divide it by a sublattice, in general, it's not a lattice. But because you took very special sublattice, it is a lattice. So that's the trick. That's the usefulness of basis. Now, if you're familiar with projection, you can do everything with projection. That is fine. But because I wanted to minimize notation, I thought it would be better to do it without mentioning any projection. So just imagine you have this short vector in the quotient lattice. And because it's a quotient, now you have a freedom. With freedom, you can add some multiple of B1. So whenever you take, so B2 mod L1 is already short, because it satisfies Hermitian inequality. And now you add some multiple of B1. So you can always choose your multiple of B1 so that the norm is less than B1 squared divided by 4. Right? So you're just lifting. Okay, so that's the so-called size reduction. So if you take your projection here, that's the way to do it, but you just imagine what is B2 modulo L1, it gives you some freedom. You can still add some multiple of B1 such that the component onto B1 is small. Okay. And now you have two cases. If your first vector is shorter than B2, then by playing with these inequalities, you realize that B1 must satisfy Hermitian inequality in the big lattice. Then you are done. And if it's not the case, if B1 is worse than B2, then you do a very simple thing. You just swap B1 and B2, and we do the same thing, which is reduce L modulo L1 with the new L and B1, and do the same thing. So that's it. That's how you show the existence of a vector satisfying Hermitian inequality by induction. And behind this induction, you deduce also an algorithm. You do it recursively, like this. and you do this swap operation. And you think about it, you do it precisely, you obtain the LL algorithm. Okay. So the algorithm is just based on taking a quotient lattice, that's it. And lifting properly, that's it. So you have a short vector in the quotient, how do you lift into a short vector in the initial lattice? That's a very simple operation. But that's not the end of things. So LL somehow is a magical algorithm. So it was realized very early that somehow it performs much better than what the worst case bound suggests, especially in low dimension. So this is just an example of this trickiness between worst case and average case. So what do I mean by that? So remember in the LL guarantees you have this 4/3 to the power d-1 divided by 4 for the Hermit factor, and that is tight in the worst case. And Kim and Venkatesh showed a few years ago that it's also tight for uniformly random LL bases. So I did not define rigorously what is an LL averages basis, but it turns out there is only a finitely many random LL basis. So you can take the uniform distribution over this basis, and it was shown in this article that this is tight for random LL basis. What is strange, however, is that if you run the LL algorithm in practice, you get something better. Instead of having 4/3, you get a smaller constant. You get something close to 1.08. And you don't get it for special lattice, you get it for any lattice, provided that you randomize the input basis. So there is some strange phenomenon between the experimental performances of the LL algorithms and what the worst case analysis tells you. So somehow, what this means is that the LL algorithm biases the distribution. Instead of giving you a random LL basis, chosen uniformly at random, it gives you a nicer distribution. So for a long time, we had absolutely no explanation for this phenomenon. Absolutely no explanation. And also no explanation for the value of the constant. Why is it 1.08? Why not 1.01? Why not something else? So we still have no progress for the meaning of the constant. There is now progress for the gap. So why is it a smaller constant? So very recently, Kim and other people proposed an explanation of this phenomenon using sand piles. So they do it for a variant of LLL. And they show that under some model, we can explain this gap phenomenon. Why is the constant smaller than for the worst case? Okay. So maybe this is not so clear. So this is what happens in practice. This is the dimension of the lattice. If you pick your favorite lattice, you choose some kind of random basis, you run the algorithm on this lattice, this is what you get for B1. So this is the norm of B1 divided by some appropriate scaling factor. This is the theoretical guarantees of LLL. So this should be exponential in the dimension. So you still get an exponential growth, but with a different constant. So you can see the gap phenomenon. So one way to see this is take a random integer lattice, take the Hermit normal form to avoid any problems how to choose a random basis. Is it true that after running the algorithm on B, you get a vector smaller than the worst case, much smaller than the worst case, say smaller than an exponential factor for a better constant? So this is the major open problem related to LLL. And we can ask something more. Can we say something about the distribution of the norm of the first vector? Or the distribution of the running time? Can we say something? That would be extremely interesting. So this is like the first basis reduction algorithm, LLL. So what can we do with a nice basis? So the first thing we can do with a nice basis is to solve hard lattice problems. For instance, imagine that, as before, we have a ball, we have a lattice, and we chose the radius of the ball in such a way that the number of points inside the intersection is small. And now I would like to find all the points in the intersection. Okay. So how can I do it? So the simplest method for this problem is enumeration. And the good thing is that it's very simple. The bad thing is that the running time is super exponential, typically. Super exponential in the dimension. And in particular, it's much bigger than the number of solutions. So how do you do that? Well, again, remember this filtration. So I use a reduced basis. Any basis define these sublattices. So what I'm saying now is that when you have some short vector, if you reduce it modulo this sublattice, it doesn't get bigger. The norm is still less than R. Because modulo Li, you can take 0 in the element Li, in the sublattice Li, so the norm must be less. It's a residue, so it's always less. And when you divide, if you take it modulo Li, you get a lower rank lattice. And the good thing is that these lower rank lattices feed each other. You can lift an element in L divided by Lj into a short vector of L divided by Li. Okay. So you can do it using size reduction. So that's exactly what is enumeration. You start with a reduced basis, and now what you're going to do is going to find all the vectors of norm less than R by first solving the trivial problem within the one-rank lattice. So you divide L by Lt minus 1. This is a one-dimensional lattice. It's very easy to enumerate points in a one-dimensional lattice. You do that. Now, you do it for the two-rank lattice. Thanks to your short vectors in the one-rank lattice, you lift them in all the short vectors of norm less than R in this two-rank lattice. And you increase little by little the dimension of the quotient lattices. At the very end, you obtain exactly your initial lattice. So it's a very simple method. You just reduce the dimension of the lattice by quotients. So typically, this step, this exhaustive search step, is much more expensive than A. For instance, you could take, let's take LLL for the first step. Then you can show that the step number B is now super exponential in the dimension of the lattice. So of course, that's not natural if you say it doesn't make sense to make this much more expensive than A. So you want to find a better trade-off. So that's what Cannon did in 1983. So he showed a way to combine both A and B so that A and B both cost 2 to the power big O of d log d polynomial time operations. Now the good thing too is that if you look at these algorithms, essentially what we need to do to evaluate the running time is just count the number of lattice points inside a ball. But we don't do that for any lattices. We do that for all the quotient lattices appearing during the algorithm. And as as I mentioned earlier, you can always heuristically estimate this number of lattice points using the Gaussian heuristic. And the nice thing is that in this particular case, the Gaussian heuristic looks very accurate. So for instance, here is the number of operations, the actual number of lattice points compared to the Gaussian heuristic estimates. And you can see that you don't see any difference between the blue and the red because they're too close to each other. So in my application to the running time of enumeration, the Gaussian heuristic gives you a very good order of magnitude. Of course, I cannot count the number of lattice points by unity, but if I'm only caring about the order of magnitude, this is more than enough. So this is very useful to estimate the running time. So this is the takeaway. If you want to do enumeration, you only need one key idea, filtration, to decrease the lattice rank. And once you chose everything, once you choose all the parameters, it is possible to reasonably estimate the running time without running the algorithm. One thing I didn't mention though is that it's possible to speed up the algorithm in practice significantly using pruning. And pruning is just a way to slice the ball of radius r in a randomized manner. So there's a trick to make things much faster in practice. Okay, so I have about 15 minutes left, so I just want to say how we can use the same ideas to get a better approximation factor. So in LLL, we implicitly use some kind of local reduction in dimension 2. So it's very natural to ask, can we do better by changing 2 into a higher number? Okay. So typically, you would like to do is, instead of working in dimension 2, you're going to work into a block size dimension. And then you're going to find short vectors in these small, low rank lattices and use this to find shorter vectors. So essentially what you want to do is you want to reduce the approximate case to a lower rank case. Okay? So thanks to enumeration and better version of enumeration, you can do this subroutine in only single exponential time in the block size. So before I show you Canaan's algorithm in super exponential time, this has been improved with sieving. So with sieving, you can get a single exponential time here. So what is great is if you choose the block size small enough, so if you take k, a block size logarithmic in the dimension, 2 to the power k becomes polynomial. Okay, so that's the only trick. So again, we can ask the help of a mathematician. So the analog of this problem would be, suppose you can show the existence of very short vectors in dimension k. Can you use that knowledge to prove the existence of short vectors in higher dimension? It turns out that was done very simply by Mordell in 1944. So he has like a one-page paper showing that for any d bigger than k, the Hermite constant in dimension d can be bounded with Hermite constant in dimension k with this relationship. So that tells you that lambda 1 is less than this. So it's a very natural question now to say, if I give you a subroutine for finding short vectors in dimension k, can you find short vectors in L within this bound? So those are the approximation algorithm from SVP. So we already saw that example with LLL. LLL was exactly this case. Okay? So what we're doing with these blockwise algorithms is the same with k instead of 2. That's it. So how do we do this? So remember this inequality that Mordell showed in a few lines. We have to use some key idea, and the key idea is duality. So that's why I really had to define the dual lattice. Okay. So the only way we know how to prove this kind of bound is to use duality. So we have to pay the price. So why does duality matter? So remember when we proved Hermite inequality, we did that by considering the quotient L divided by L1. So duality gives you another way to reduce dimension. So how do you do that? You take a lattice, and you take a vector in the dual lattice, call it V. Now consider the hyperplane orthogonal to this dual vector. Now intersect the hyperplane with the lattice, you get a smaller sublattice, a d-1 rank sublattice. So that's model's proof. You're going to work with this guy. So that's what all the nice blockwise algorithms that we know do. They give you a Hermite approximation factor, which is exactly the one of Model's inequality, using a k-dimensional SVP oracle. And actually, you can relax the oracle. There's a bit of a loss here, but it doesn't really matter. So what you need to remember is that these algorithms are to Model's inequality what LLL is to Hermite's inequality. The only thing that changes, they call the oracle on these quotient lattices or the dual. And by choosing a big but small enough block size, you get in polynomial time a sub-exponential approximation factor as promised. So unfortunately, there are limits to these kind of things because Model's inequality can be tight, so it's not clear at all how we can improve upon these algorithms. So one thing I want to say before concluding is to discuss the average case. So that is relevant to security estimates. So we don't want just a worst case bound. We want to know what happens in practice. So people have been playing with these blockwise algorithms, and it turns out that in practice, it doesn't seem to make much differences in all the strategies, even though they may have different theoretical bounds. So that's why in practice, people seem very happy with a very old strategy called BKZ, due to Schnorr. And that has been used in many recall computations. So what you do in BKZ, I'm not going to describe BKZ, you work with this quotient lattices, and you call your subroutine on these quotient lattices. But you do it in a cyclic way, so that you make regular progress during the reduction. So one problem that you have when you do this is the gap between the worst case and the average case, like in LLL. So remember in LLL, with this worst case bound, and then the experimental case was with a different constant. So we have the same problem with all these blockwise algorithms. The worst case is related to Model's inequality. And then in practice, you have smaller constants. And you want to guess this constant. So one nice thing, dating back for a couple of years ago, is that it's possible to kind of heuristically predict this constant using random lattice theory. So it's been noticed that if you make the heuristic assumption that these quotient lattices behave like random lattices when it comes to their first minimum, you can predict the shape of the basis of BKZ. So that allows you to guess what would happen if you were running BKZ with a very high block size, what kind of output you would get. Essentially what happens is that this Model's inequality is the same, except that you replace Hermite constant with the Gaussian heuristic. That's it. Now, there's a natural question. How sound is this modelization? Is it really true that these quotient lattices behave like random lattices? So, in 2011, we did some preliminary experiments and realized that as the block size increased, these quotient lattices behave more and more like random lattices. But still, there's a gap. So it's a bit of it's a strong assumption to say that they behave exactly like random lattices. But still, it's better than nothing. So that leads you to approximate security estimates. So in the final minutes, I want to say what are the problems with this security estimates. So what we want to do is, in practice, we want to select parameters using the best attack. And that you can only do with the state of the art. So you try to find as many attacks as possible and try to identify the most efficient one. Okay. So why is it so difficult? So there's many reasons. Cryptanalysis is complicated, and the more parameters that you have, the longer it takes. And when you play with the algorithms, you have so many parameters. It's not clear how to select these parameters optimally. So actually, that could be a way to exploit machine learning. Use machine learning to select the parameters automatically, fully automatically. So this problem is already complicated with classical public key algorithms. So that was done by Lenstra and Verrall 20 years ago. So they suggested to model the performances of the best algorithm nodes using benchmarks. And then they wanted to add a security margin by speculating on hardware improvements and algorithmic improvements. And of course, that's very difficult. And we saw with small characteristic discrete log, which completely disappeared. This was completely unpredictable. Okay? And unfortunately, that's not so easy because our theory is not well suited to this kind of statements. What we would like, for instance, is a lower bound on the running time of the algorithms, or at least more information on the distribution of the running time. But usually we don't have that. We don't know the expectation, we don't know the variance of the running time. We don't have that level of precision. So when we do a security estimate, if you look at the NIST competition, it's very far away from this. You do a lot of simplification. For instance, you might even mix upper bound with lower bound to get to make some order of magnitude. So if you look at lattice-based submission to NIST, you realize that most of them just rely on some script to assess the security level. And what I want to say, that of course it's better than nothing, but you should not take it for granted. So this script, this Python script, do not fully reflect the many uncertainties of the state of the art. There's so many things that could go wrong. So for instance, there's a popular paper, Estimate All the Algebra NTU paper, that gives you this kind of things. So for every candidate, they look at the parameters and then give you a security level. They tell you, wow, to break this submission, you need 2 to the power 179.42. So this is what I want to warn you about. This is way too precise. We don't have that level of precision on the complexity of the algorithm. So this is too much. We don't have this. So why is it complicated? Typically what they want to do is they identify the block size in these blockwise algorithms, but they give it a precise value. They say, okay, to break this candidate, you need block size 247. Does it mean that 246 does not break the submission? No, of course not. So that means that actually, in reality, you would not get a fixed block size, you would get some range of block size. And even if you have a fixed block size, you still need to estimate the cost of the subroutine. And that's very difficult. Precisely. You can get an order of magnitude, but there's a lot of uncertainties. Okay. And then you need to also estimate the number of times you would need to call this subroutine. So as you can see, there's so many uncertainties. There's an uncertainty here, there's an uncertainty here, and there's an uncertainty here. But this script is not reflected. The script gives you a fixed number, and it may give you a false sense of security. Even this is already very, very difficult. Imagine a much simpler situation, a much simpler algorithm, SHA-256 hashing. Famous because of its use in Bitcoin. If you had asked cryptographers how much would it cost to evaluate SHA-256, assuming state-of-the-art implementation, I doubt any cryptographer would have told you that now we could do 2 to the 90 SHA-256 computation using moderately expensive hardware prevalent in China. So, even for a simple algorithm like SHA-256, this is non-trivial. Okay? Notice also that there is a gap between computations and memory. Okay, so you can see we do many more computations than we are able to store memories today. And these uncertainties, you can see it in benchmarks for lattice records. So here's a couple of benchmarks that happened in the past few years. And what is difficult is how do you guess what happens for higher dimension? So obviously we know things much better than before, but still, do we know things well enough that we can guess with a very precise number like 2 to the power 194.47? No, I don't think so. However, we can make comparison with so for instance, if you take the big seeding records, you see that the number of points used by these records still fit the model of 2018. So in 2018, with Thomas Vedic, we tried to estimate how many vectors would be required for any seeding algorithms. And that's this line, an exponential number of vectors. And if you look at the numerical figures of the best seeding implementation that we know of, they're all over this line. Okay? They fit this thing, so nothing strange really happened. What has happened is the treatment. What with these vectors that led to better records here. But in terms of the size, the memory consumption, it fits what we knew. Of course, this does not mean that in the future, somebody will not come up with a new seeding algorithm that requires less vectors. But if you assume that this bound is correct, then you can still get some reasonable lower bound on the cost of any seeding algorithms. So unfortunately, my time is limited. Fortunately, I would say the time is limited. So I just want to conclude with key takeaway from this talk. So lattice reduction, the theory of showing the existence of nice bases, was introduced in mathematics to prove the first inequalities on lattice environments. But in mathematics, it kind of disappeared. We know much better tools to prove much better inequalities. Okay? But unfortunately, in algorithms, we live in a dark age, so we still rely very strongly on this lattice reduction business. So here are a very interesting question. Can we use these powerful tools developed in mathematics to enhance our lattice reduction algorithms? And actually this has been done. For instance, the discrete Gaussian distribution is key to some seeding variants. Okay. And there's other situation where we use really nice mathematics to improve the analysis or the design of algorithms. But still, there's much more to do with this. A very interesting question is, can we take advantage of special properties of lattices in our lattice reduction business? So if you follow the ePrint, you've seen there's a couple of ePrint papers that exactly deal with this. Take a model lattice, or take an ideal. Can we speed up LLL, or do a more sophisticated stuff? This is really a work in progress, but there's a lot of progress right now. Okay. And then if you look at the new records with seeding, so it still uses lattice reduction. So there's a very natural question, which is, can we do the same thing as in mathematics? Can we get rid of lattice reduction to solve lattice problem efficiently. So in mathematics, we got rid of lattice reduction to show better inequalities. Maybe we can do the same thing to solve our short vector problem or closed vector problem directly, more efficiently. And since there are so many people in the audience, I want you to think hard about this open problem. Can we find short vectors that approximate within a polynomial factor, but efficiently, either quantumly or in sub-exponential time? That's really the key questions, and I hope one of you will solve that problem. Thank you for your attention.
So you mentioned about the performance of some kind of spatial lattices in lattice reduction. Maybe you can do that. So what kind of spatial lattice? I think maybe cis lattice or something like that. Because we have a reduction, so the general the standard case of this problem, we may not compare that because we have a reduction from the side. So we may have some kind of performance for comparabilities, right?
So that's exactly what some papers on the ePrint are tackling. So for instance, yesterday we saw people talk about fully morphic encryption. Many implementations of fully morphic encryption actually use these special lattices. So one of these ePrint papers is showing that they actually reduce one of these special lattices by taking advantage of these algebraic properties to reduce it in a much shorter time. So if you were using the same matrix for a general lattice, it would take really a long time to run the algorithms, but they managed to find short vectors in a really short time in practice.
More questions?
So is there an algorithm that interpolates between the enumeration and the saving?
I'm sorry?
Is there an algorithm that interpolates between the enumeration and saving? For example, it maybe takes a little bit more memory, but then it takes slightly less time.
So that's a very good question. So one way to phrase the question is the following. So when I gave an overview of short vectors, I said, okay, we have all these SVP algorithms. Oops. Yeah. So what you're asking is there like a unification of enumeration and seeding, right?
Yes.
And you could even say more. I mean, is there a unification of everything here? Isn't it just actually? Is there like a general algorithm that unifies everything here? Yeah, I think that's a very natural question. So I agree with you. I don't know the answer to this, but it's a very natural question.
More questions? Okay, let's thank Phong again for the great talk.